Creative Fiends! Welcome back to Tasha's Imaginarium. For this video, I'll be showing you how to create a fake stone wall like the one I have back here. We're dividing this project into two sections. First, the texturing of the stone, and then painting. Now, to get started on the first portion, you will need spackling material. Now, how much you need depends on the size of your project. For this wall, I used a small tub, but if you have a larger area, you'll definitely need more. For a complete list of the materials I used, check out the description box below. All right, let's get started. I begin by taking long strips of masking tape and pressing them on the wall in wavy, irregular lines. Now, my wall is already finished, so I'm showing you how I did this technique on a foam board. It's also easier for you to see it this way. I want this to look as realistic and natural as possible, so I press my tape into random shapes of different sizes to really resemble the rock outlines. As I'm pressing down the masking tape, I make sure to pinch it in the center so that it creates a jagged edge. Now, just for fun, on this side, I'm going to show you how to do a stone block texture, kind of like what you would find on castles or dungeons if you're going for that look. This is pretty much the same process as before, but instead of making irregular organic shapes, I'm making straight horizontal lines all across. You still want to make sure to pinch the centers of your tape as you're pressing it down, because otherwise you'll have lines that are too straight and thick and it just doesn't look quite as good. Once you've set down all of your horizontal lines, it's time to make short vertical lines in between. Make sure to stagger these lines to really give that brick-like effect. Once I've completely covered my wall in tape, I can begin texturing with the spackle. To make the most out of my materials and also to save on drying time, I spread the spackle kind of thinly and I don't worry too much about how it looks. I just make sure that it's thicker towards the edges of the tape and thinner in the center of the shape. Next, I take some aluminium foil and crumple it up. I use the crumpled aluminium foil to press and create spiky texture all over the spackle. Then I dip my finger into some water and smooth those spikes over so they don't look quite like frosting and they look more like stone texture. And then I repeat this process in another small section. I like to work in small sections. It just makes it a lot easier to handle. Now, if this was on my wall, before I move ahead, I will take the strips of tape off in a large section before moving on and spackling more areas, because you don't want the spackle to dry completely on your tape, otherwise it'll just be ruined. And it's the exact same process for the brick wall. So once my wall was dry, I could begin painting the base layer. And for this, I used a regular interior wall paint in a flat finish and a light gray color. That looks pretty darn good. And we're done. So now that your base layer of paint is dry, we can get started with shading. So for the shading layer, I use a much darker gray color, and I use a wash technique. So all that means is you use a very runny paint. So you dilute it with some water and brush it on, and then you wipe it clean with a wet towel or sponge so that you only have the paint remaining in the nooks and crannies of the texture while revealing the base layer paint as you're wiping on the surface. And once that layer is dry, this is what you'll end up with. So now that the shading is dry, it's time to add on the highlights. Now this looks pretty good as is, but adding the highlights gives the texture much more depth and dimension for a more realistic look. To achieve the highlights, I use a dry brush technique with a textured sponge. Dry brushing is when you only use a very small amount of paint on your brush or sponge so that it's practically dry as you're painting. And you use a sort of gentle scraping motion so that only the elevated parts of your texture really pick up the paint. And I'm using a translucent and shimmery white iridescent paint to really give the illusion of those shimmery flecks that you see in stone. And that's it. We're done. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please ding that like button. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you all in the comment section below. And please remember to subscribe to keep watching more creative mischief on Tasha's Imaginarium. Until next time, stay fiendish.